to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things Cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, a.k.a. Uberbear, and his co-pilot...
This is Stu, saying hello, and welcome to a new episode. And I'm excited about this one. This is going to be a little whimsical, a little fun.
Yeah, which we simply don't have a tendency of doing here at UberCube. It's fun. We just don't believe in it. It's just not one of our mantras. But... No. Before we even start in the episode, Stu and I are in the middle of a steep match of Magic right now.
That's right.
So I'm going to start by, I'm going to tap my mountain, Soul Ring.
I'll pay 2 life, mental misstep. Hey, I'm sorry. Was that a signet in your hand that you were getting a little bit antsy there to put down on the battlefield? You better put that back in your hand there, big boy.
Just blew up my entire game.
Womp womp.
Yeah, so anyways, that's a little prelude to what we're going to do here on this particular episode. We're going to have a little bit of fun, and we're going to discuss some cards that quite possibly are a little too good for cube environments.
What do you want to call this? So I see you've got a title there. Give us that.
I called it Too Powerful Magic. I had some other things too, but at the end of the day, we're going to break down some cards that may be quite possibly a detriment to some, well, we were not going to call them low-powered environments, but the cards that we're going to discuss in the next few moments are going to be, in our opinions, simply dedicated to the highest power environments or the ones with the highest ceilings. And in this, we're actually going to do a little recall on our previous Old Gnawbones episode. We're going to use some of those EDH brain concepts that we touched upon before. But before we get into the topic any deeper, because I'm going pretty deep, digging some sand here right now, discussion that we're about to have, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy our refreshment of the pod. What are you having today there, Mr.?
I'm just going to go ahead and introduce everybody's because it's my favorite, and well, I say my favorite. It's like it's my staple, right? And I've got them in my little mini fridge that I keep here in our little recording studio. Yeah, and it's Guinness.
And I got.
And I'm hoping to be.
And I got a Guinness too. And
Can we get a sponsorship anytime soon?
Yeah, but I'm not gonna lie to you. This is mostly because I went shopping today at Wegmans, and they had it was an atomic pumpkin. And I'm not a pumpkin beer guy. I'm just not. It's not my jam. But it is... Atomic Pumpkin is one of my favorites. Yeah, I'm going to work it out. One of my favorites, but it is a pumpkin with a little bit of habanero in it. And I looked at it today, and I was like, oh, man, that's $13 for 4 beers. I'm going to get some Guinness for $8. Yeah, let's go. Right. So let's pop them open.
All right, crack it. And let's get cracking. All right, so yeah, 2 powerful magic. So these are cards that are, you're going to see them, Legacy Cube, Vintage Cube, you know, they have their place, right? But as Anthony was mentioning I don't like to use that lower powered, right? Not. I think it's being disingenuous to a more focused cube, right? A thematic cube, something like that. And yeah, you do have to be conscious of power level, right? But you're not attempting to power it down. You're attempting to be flavorful, thematic. So I think that's a more descriptive way of describing those cubes.
So what we're going to use is kind of the benchmark, kind of like we did the old Gnawbones method. We had just kind of a system or a mechanism we used to kind of identify cards and labels and breaking them out and putting them in silos. That's kind of what we're going to do here. But what we're going to use as our mechanism this time around, and it's going to allude back to that episode, is kind of what the reminiscent or what the remnants of EDH and Commander can cause to a cube environment. And what I mean by that is, how does your play experience as, hey, I started out, I played Commander with my play group, had a great time, been doing this for a couple of years, I've heard about this cool thing we've been talking about doing cube. These cards that I've been rocking on a regular basis are pretty great. I'm going to break down my Commander cube, as I talked about in a previous episode. I broke down a Mimeoplasm deck, and how you can just take cards and put them in a box and think that everything's going to be okay in a 1v1 environment.
Yeah, it's a great point that EDH has become so synonymous with Magic, right? It's the most popular format. Everybody's very, very familiar with it, right? I would say at this point, unless you're, and I'm going to give a shout out to a friend of mine and a guy that got me into Magic, who's a Canadian guy called Andrew. If he listens to this, I love you. He got me into Magic. He's not an EDH player. He plays this Canadian Highlander craziness where you have points for power and yada, yada, yada. I think there's some fringe people out there that are playing those formats and the 60 card formats. But for the most part, EDH is it's the format of most Magic players' choices, right? And once you get into a situation where you're playing EDH predominantly, right? And I will say that when I first started hanging around with yourself and the other guys that are in our play group, that's what we did. We got together and played EDH. There wasn't any question of whether or not we were going to play another format. So it became the benchmark for how I judged every single card, right? And yes, I certainly do look at the decks that I build and think, I want to build a strong deck today, or I want to build maybe a more goofy, a more fun deck today.
Right.
But you know what? There was one card that it didn't matter how strong or how weak that I cared about that deck. There was one card that I always put.
Are you trying to say it's always part of the 100, quite possibly the 99 plus command tower?
It's the 99 plus 1 command tower, exactly.
Yeah, and this card that we're going to talk about, and the one, and before I even get, if you haven't guessed it yet, I'm going to give you a little breakdown here. It's going to be, this card has been grandfathered in. This card in the commander aspect has been deemed fair.
Yes.
It's been the card that's been the life raft for the player who's behind. But it's also been the card that's villainized the person that says, turn one, Soul Ring.
Because
Mental Misstep cast.
Mental Misstep, exactly. And I will say that I play Mental Misstep in a couple of my stronger decks.
Yeah.
I have got no problem going down a card in a 4-player game to stop someone's Soul Ring. It only costs me 2 life. I'll do it turn 0.
Ruthless.
It's got to happen. It's too much of an advantage for one player.
And I know we're a cube podcast, but Stu does some interesting things. You know how typically, in my experience, you want to play cards that play to the table. You got a meta within a game, and this is a very Commander EDH-centric concept. He mental misstepped me one day while playing Soul Ring, and I was thinking, why in the hell would you run mental misstep? Well, you know why you run mental misstep? Because every single commander deck has Soul Ring in it. And everybody's getting super efficient because they're following that way. It used to be more of a battleship-driven type gameplay. Now it's becoming efficient, and it's following the heels of Cube and the MTGO. Everything, because of the power creep in Magic, is all the games are being impacted.
And it is a decision.
Every format.
Yeah, and it is a decision that I make based on the deck that I'm playing against, right? I'm not just going to automatically mental misstep anybody's Soul Ring. I will mental misstep your Soul Ring if you're playing Neheb. Now, Anthony has a very strong, I'm definitely on the higher end of
Have you guys seen that meme? Have you seen that meme with Elmo with fire just above him? if you have your Android or iPhones after this episode, I want everybody to type in Elmo fire and just in your search for your GIFs, and you'll understand that is the feeling that I feels while playing the head.
That is that deck.
But we have, as we do here at Ubercube, we have tangent number 1. We're going to just kick that one out, and we're getting back to Soul Ring. And why are we talking about Soul Ring? Well, as you have noticed, we've talked about it in a very casual concept. It's become indoctrinated into the EDH brain. It's everybody plays it.
I will make a little bit of a counter argument there.
Go ahead.
Right? It has, because it's in every Commander precon. Because most
saturated.
people, unless they've turn zeroed it within their play group, they're adding it to their EDH decks, right? And that's kind of diluted, I feel, the opinion maybe that it's too powerful, which seems completely counterintuitive, because the reason why it finds a place is because of how strong it is. It's ludicrous. It's like top 5 in the vintage.
Yeah, like it comes up all the time is, in the off-channel conversations about Commander. Hey, let's talk about, why don't you ban this card? Why don't you ban this card? Well, at this point, it's proliferated out of control, right?
Yeah, you can't ban it.
It's in every single deck. The point is that whenever you decide you want to build your first cube in the whole wide world, I want to build my very first one. And we have this we're in a lot of chats, like we're on a MTG drafting chat for Facebook.
Yep.
And you'll get a new cube curator, and they want hey, I've heard about this cool cube thing. I want some feedback from the group. What do you guys think about this? And every single list that I'll go through, and I did this too. And my good friend Chris Moore, he checks me all the time because I'm always wanting to do it, and I'll explain why. Soul Ring. Well, I've got this new La Femme Fatale cube. It'd be really great. Soul Ring. I've got this new Artifact cube. It'd be great. Soul Ring.
Yep.
Well, guess what, folks? Soul Ring is unhealthy, in my opinion, for unpowered cubes in general, as in thematic cubes, pauper cubes, and I know I'm really reaching here, but anything that's breaking any kind of the highest tiers of Magic, and I'm going to explain why. A general rule of thumb is that a rock should produce the similar amount of on rate as mana.
Right.
Mana is your currency within the game. Sol Ring basically breaks this total fundamental that Magic is based on from the inception of the game, and it by 1 and provides an advantage of 2. Whereas your mana that you're using on track, on rate, regarding of any permutations or deviations you do by breaking the game, just we're talking about flat out currency.
Yeah.
It skips over the currency and gives them access to mana that you wouldn't normally have. It completely breaks the organic nature of the game at a fundamental level.
Yeah, it does. You feel like there's some part of the fundamental game design and the flow where turn 1, you have 1 mana. Turn 2, you have 2 mana. Turn 3, and yeah, there are going to be ways that you can get around it a little bit.
It wasn't repeatable, etc.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sol Ring is going to continue to skip you forward 2 for a cost of 1.
And it's not just the fact that it's so efficient, it's the fact that it comes in so early, right? Because you think about if there was, I don't know, a spell that allowed you to accelerate 8 mana, but it came out on turn 5 or turn 6 or something like that. Yeah, the rate at which you're growing your mana might be much, much greater, but its power level wouldn't even be close to Sol Ring because it comes out so much earlier. Turn 2, having access to 4 mana, maybe even more depending on what other rocks you play. It's way too much.
Well, besides even like the EDH or Commander grandfather in clause that this card gets oftentimes from your curators, I'll even hear people die on the hill conversationally with certain topics, and this is going to be let's start with this whole thing. I'm going to sign off. This is my opinion, but I feel pretty strongly about this opinion. I had one recently where someone actually responded in a forum because I kind of put a thing out there, and they said, "Well, I saw it in a 1-drop cube, and it didn't harm that cube at all." And I walked away, and I kind of said, okay, sure. But what if you've got, I don't know, what's the artifact, the Gafur artifact, the one that costs 1, or you've got multiple 1-drop creatures that are colorless.
Right.
That immediately popped in my head.
Yeah.
That doesn't really just signpost that this card's broken yet. But what if your 1-drops are not vanilla and they have activated abilities that you can reduce the cost by using Sol Ring to gain a critical game advantage versus your opponent who's sitting on this other table playing a natural game of Magic, paying their said currency 1 for 1, and you're literally doing 1 for 2.
Yeah.
So it doesn't equal out at the end of the day. It's not a 1 for 1. There's no parity in this card.
No,
it can be backbreaking. And one more point that I want to make it is another lure of this besides Commander and besides it seems harmless and innocuous. I assure you, it's not. Another one is it's got some sweet art out there. And it does. And they continue to condition us by printing more art. Yep. And I've shielded myself up this. I've said, okay, Power Cube exclusively. But every once in a while, I get this little trickle, and Chris Moore says, nay, because I'm like, oh my God, dude, they just made this Commander black set, and it's got skulls on it. How sick would that be in my horror cube environment? He's like, no, dude, that would break it. And I'm like, God damn it,
yes, it
Chris.
would.
But he's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
But the art keeps drawing me back because the art's gorgeous, and people want to see it. And they literally align it with the highest tier of Magic. Players have become... your players will dig it. You drop it in there, your players will play it.
They're going to love it.
But one player's going to love it. The other person's going to not get a really good game because the mana advantage is so strong. So let's cover. Stu,
I was going to say, the reason why it's about speed, right?
It's 100%.
It's all about speed. It's about pace. From a cube design perspective, you've got to think about how fast do you want to speed up the ability for your players to be able to cast their spells, right? Every cube, I can imagine, at a thematic level, is going to be able to have ways to make a game very unfun just by virtue of the fact that one player is going to be able to get those 4 mana spells out on turn 2. If you're building a cube and you're designing the themes, you're designing the archetypes around the fact that the pacing is going to be on that turn 1, turn 2, maybe turn 3, a turn 3 Kadama's Reach or a Cultivate or something along those lines. Sure, if you've got like a little overcosted or slightly more expensive green or red or whatever the case may be, you can kind of build that in. But the pacing is so critical when you're designing a cube. Do you want any single player to be able to look at to look at their hand or look at their draft and think, you know what, if I've got that on turn 1, it's over. All right. And then all the other players got to suffer 100%. For it.
So I'm a problem solution person, right? So I didn't want to just come in here and poo-poo on the Soul Ring because there's people there, like I said, there are people who are going to die on this hill. And I will say that there may be some environments out there where this 100% works. But when I'm speaking about this at the highest tiers, because the mana advantage this provides, it can be caustic to some environments.
Sure.
So I said, hey, Anthony, self. I used to say self. That always drove me nuts. Self. What could I provide the audience as a solution or a comparison? So let's start with Soul Ring on its stats. For 1 colorless mana, you tap it, you get 2 colorless mana, add this ability. And it's funny because I got the old card up here. Play as an interrupt.
Right.
For the old boomer magics out there.
That's right.
And Stu,
I
interrupt Stu all the time in Magic.
Anytime you like.
But let's do a cross comparison. So that was the stats for a Soul Ring. Now, if I took this and I flipped it on its head and I said, well, Mind Stone. For 2 colorless mana, you tap it, you get 1 mana in your, or 1 colorless mana in your mana pool.
Yep.
Completely inverted.
You could even go as far. This is a great option.
Yeah.
You could even go something like a Star Compass.
You could.
If you wanted to slow it down a little bit.
could.
Because if I remember, Star Compass comes in tapped.
Yeah.
Right? Definitely a way to keep things slow. But I think Mind Stone, just purely from a pacing perspective, works great.
And
it's
you get the advantage of you
land.
can pay 1, sacrifice it, you can draw a card. So
Exactly.
that's how it makes up for that, that loss of advantage that you've just given your new overly hyped up Soul Ring that you've put in there. You have to think about it. You've put like a literally like a fuel accelerant in your fuel tank.
Yeah.
And you're burning with the Soul Ring versus Mind Stone, literally on rate with your lands, not a broken, not unfair card. That's what I wanted to offer as an option to anybody that's new out there learning how to build a cube. So let's talk about some pros for Soul Ring. This is stuff that kind of goes into this because this is the die on the hill versus not die on the hill.
Yeah.
So where it comes in, the grandfathering is it allows players to catch up when they're behind. So if you're playing a cube and you feel like that's your philosophy, that no soldier left behind, being ex-military, not to make jest, or let's a player cast spells that seem obvious, or you should be able to just play your cards. I come here to play Magic. I should be able to play Magic.
You should, but if you need to cast a 1 mana artifact that gives you 2 mana, or you need to pull that Soul Ring on turn 5 or 6 to cast your spells, then maybe your deck isn't.
And then there was a previous conversation that you and I had about Ancestral Recall versus, I don't know, Lotus and Soul Ring.
Literally any other deck.
And it came down to which one would you rather do, draw cards, or would you rather have mana?
Draw cards.
Well, yeah, right. So that's kind of the point that I'm going to put here is sure, they must have something to spend it on, so it can't be that bad.
Yes, but you cannot compare literally the most powerful card that's ever been printed. Yeah. In my opinion, Ancestral Recall is number 1, but sure. Lotus, Soul Ring, Mana Crypts, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they're not great as a top deck. If you're in a top deck war, it's a terrible draw.
And then the next one is that I got on here is, we talked about before, and it's only because I had this conversation with somebody online, is I got a 1-drop cube. It can't be toxic to that, right? Well, Hope of Gafur says it can be. And then anything else that costs 1 mana or leads you into it for the next... You see where I'm going with this.
I do.
Your gap, you close pretty quickly on your color stuff, in addition to abilities. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of... And then cons... I mean, we kind of said it is it produces mana faster than the land, which is the fiat currency for the game, right? And then in hand on the play is such an advantage. And I understand late game, it's lost advantage. It has a timing mechanism attached to it too that could make it seem like it's not harmful in your environment, maybe through your first play test, because I don't know, turn 7 they rolled out a Soul Ring, it does nothing. It's those turn 1, turn 2 Soul Rings that are the defining. It's what defines that card in general.
It does.
Advantage.
And going back, like the reason why I think that the card has been kind of people are desensitized to it in a little way is because if you play it in a 4-player environment, and maybe it might be okay if you've got an automatic, everybody gets one in a 2-headed giant cube, for example, right?
Sure.
But in a situation where you've got 1 versus 1, you don't have 2 other people at the table like you do in a commander game to be like, right, there's your boogeyman, right? There's the guy to go after. Because I fully expect, even though I play in all of my decks, I know if I get a Soul Ring out on turn 1, I expect to get the hammer laid down on me. So, but you don't have to worry about that in a 1v1.
So if you haven't noticed, this episode actually was derived originally from Stu and I just talking about Soul Ring. And this isn't necessarily a new conversation. A lot of players that have been playing Magic for a very long time have also had this conversation. A lot of cube curators understand this. A lot of EDH commanders even understand that this card is broken.
Yes, a lot of groups have Rule 0 banned it. I've seen discussions numerous times.
It's become so just part of the community at this point that it gets a level of acceptance when it translates to a cube curation. And
it
for
shouldn't.
people, right. And I'm sure that, again, there's people that are going to die on this hill, and I respect that. But then there's going to be the new curators that have this brand new, beautiful black commander or green commander soul ring that's like, this thing is so gorgeous, so beautiful. Why can I not put this in my cube? Buyer beware is all we're offering here.
Correct.
But this is not a soul ring exclusive episode. We're going to talk about some other cards that have similar effects. The next one, and if you don't mind, Stu, I'd like to do this one. There's a reason, and I'll let you pick up the next subgroup. But this one's going to be mine's, and it's only because of testing. Yes. So we're going to move over to white, and we're going to break this down by Wooburg. And so for white, and not everyone in the community is going to bring this, and we do have some honorable mentions. We may save that for an additional episode. But this one I'm going to start out with is Armageddon effects. And there's a lot of reasons why I'm going to say that Armageddon effects are not necessarily good for an environment. Okay. They're certainly not considered loved and adored in the Commander EDH group.
They should.
It almost breaks the social contract. I agree. We've argued this before.
Mass land destruction has feelings.
MLB does. It has feelings. But yeah, so just letting the lands matters people do what they want to do ad nauseum. Sure. But anyways, Armageddon effects. Yeah. There's something that you should buyer beware. And the reason why I chose these two is because they're my story. I run both these in my powered vintage cube. No big deal.
Should.
But what I use these for in my mind, and I don't feel like I was necessarily wrong, is these bolster my opinion of aggro. Like I felt like aggro needs to get in there, establish a couple of 2/1s for 1, right? And then Armageddon out. And then just sweep the rug out from your opponent. They have
just
zero chance of recovery.
Literally my favorite way to play Vintage Cube,
it's
right there.
Awfulness. And I get it. But then, so I took that idea and I translated it over to my Horror Cube, which is equivalent of my Vintage Cube. And it was fine. I ran Armageddon in there in particular, not Ravages of War. I've put both these side by side in this. Sure. But I did run them in for a period. And what I did it for is so, like the Humans white deck or the Spirits. Well, a couple things happened. One, I noticed that it wasn't necessarily needed for the environment. Didn't change the gameplay. Didn't make it good.
Yep.
When it happened, it actually led to feel bads because it was supposed to be a fun cube environment, even though it's a higher tiered, higher power. I mean, I'm running powerful magic in there,
sure,
but within the confines of spirits, vampires, and werewolves, right?
Absolutely.
So we'll just put that as the ceiling. But it didn't do anything to make it better. All it does is sweep the rug out from underneath your opponent, gives them no chance of recovering resources, which has a very much a place in a high-powered or a vintage cube environment.
And do you know why? Do you know why I feel like that?
Yeah.
Because I feel like the vintage environment it's the most competitive, right? You're trying to win.
Yes.
All right? When I'm playing if I'm playing a vintage cube with yourself and all the other guys, I'm playing that vintage cube. I'm trying to be as busted and broken and whatever as possible, right?
Yes.
And yes, I like to win when I'm playing the thematic cubes, but I like to have fun. And these cards, they're not fun.
And could I run that thematically? I chose the one that's from, I guess it was from the 20, where it was sparkly and it had like a horror genre look to it. It represented Armageddon, which is a scary idea. As a matter of fact, Lucky Paper Radio actually during their Pack 1 Pick 1 back in October, they actually highlighted this card. And that's actually, they inadvertently kind of triggered me thinking about like, it's scary, but not for the reasons it should be scary. It just was which one of us different, which one is not the same. So I appreciate you guys for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Because I had kind of just glanced over it for so long, thinking it was so critical to make my Mardu package or my Boros package and to get through, because I was trying to sweep the rug from mid-range and control, but at the cost of the environment's fun. And so that's why I'm putting this on the buyer beware. And there's more complexity to this card. It's not as clean. It's not in the vintage environment. It's very snappy, clean, blow up the lands, but there's also parity concerns where you have to make sure that you have the advantage to be able to recover.
Yeah, it sucks if someone's got a mana rocks, Moxen,
and it becomes useless pretty quick. So
exactly.
So this kind of has a two-front conversation. One, this card's super powerful, blows up the board, can just stalemate a board, and or give advantage to a player, plus the parity breaking symmetry on the idea, right? So there's a lot that doesn't necessarily belong in my opinion, and I think Stu agrees, a thematic unpowered environment. It can be toxic.
Because it's one of these kind of, it stands by itself, right? It works incredibly well in the vintage cube. If you can snag, a couple of Moxen, Mana Crypt, Sol Ring, whatever the case may be, power out some creatures, and after the first couple of turns get this down, it really does make it difficult for your opponent. But is it thematic for a white aggro deck?
No.
Maybe. I mean, it's a great finish. It's a game-ending card for a mono white aggro deck in the vintage cube.
Yeah, 100%.
For sure it is.
But if we're doing
unless, like you say, they've got those Moxen. But How are you thematically including this card in a thematic cube?
So let's kind of get problem solution. So this is what I wanted to run, right? And I still want to be able to take off some of their mana, etc. I'm a new curator.
Sure.
Well, you can do the Field of Ruins. You can do the Strip Mines. You can do the Wastelands. You can do Spot, not Mass Land
Ghostly
Destruction.
Quarter.
You could even, if you're going to that, you could even get away with Wildfire. And I think you could play that safely within an environment that could handle it.
Wildfire
and it's not going to break a deck.
I think would be a
if you
challenging
were
card to
diehard,
make
but yeah, if you were diehard to run this type of thing, I want to get some Mass Land stuff. I just don't think that. I think Armageddon and Ravages of War are on the cusp of,
Of course, they're incredibly efficient. They only have 1 pip as well, which I don't think is something that shouldn't be understated.
Yeah, actually, you're right. Because
it should not be understated.
The one thing we kind of jumped over to, and we'll do this, I know this is late in the game, but Armageddon cost 1 plains, 3 colorless, destroy all lands. Ravages of War, exactly the same.
Yep.
I mean, it's about that clean, folks.
It is.
It's very powerful.
Incredibly efficient for the amount of... think about, destroy all creatures or destroy all lands, right?
Yeah.
Kind of most, but pretty similar.
Destruction
effects.
of resources.
It's a huge destruction of resources, right? But would you compare Armageddon to something like Damnation, which is 2 black and 2 white? Would you compare it to something
you got a good
like
point there. It's the pips.
Would you compare it to something like Supreme Verdict?
Right, I see where you're going with this. Yeah, because they have it like at a cost. They're not clean.
They're not.
It makes you work harder to do that than blowing up lands.
Yep.
I guess that's actually another thing we should add for a power creep problem with these cards. So this is another one. For the white section, buyer beware. There's a lot of other cards we could talk about ad nauseum, but these are the ones we have chosen for this episode. Let's move on to our next section. And I'd ask that Stu let's lead Stu off with this one and see what you got.
Yeah. We talked about on the socials, on the Twitterverse, we actually discussed another blue card recently, and we had the discussion about whether or not cube curators, Magic players out there consider this particular card to scale well within the cube environment.
Yep.
And that card was Force of Will.
Yep.
Right?
Bolt the Bird episode.
In the Bolt the Bird episode, go check it out. We both kind of came to the same agreement, and I do honestly feel, in my opinion, Force of Will is just absurdly strong. Is it on the same power level as Mana Drain?
No, it's not. No.
It's not, but it is. The reason why I think it is...
It gets the job done reactionary, but it does not provide the advantage post doing that.
It doesn't.
That's the difference.
But it also costs no mana and allows you to follow your own curve with what you have in your hand and not have to leave up 2 blue mana in order to be able to cast it.
But
very different in an EDH
as
environment.
we did talk about in the Bolt the Bird episode, Force of Will translates safely and scales safely, believe it or not, dynamically. I run it in a lot of my cubes, and not once is it
never
broken.
been broken.
I've got it in my Powered Vintage. I have it in my Artifact cube. I have it in my Horror cube.
It's never been a problem.
Maybe another one, but I don't know.
And I love Force of Will.
Never once is it broken environment because it scales.
But is Mana Drain broken?
No.
And that's the card that we're going to talk about, right?
Yep.
So, Mana Drain, it's 2 blue pips.
Yep.
Counter target spell at the beginning of your next main phase. Add an amount of colorless mana equal to that spell's converted mana
That
cost.
interesting little triangle thing or whatever they've added before. Diamond, excuse me. I had to get used to that because I always got that old school, you know what I mean? The little C or whatever it is.
That's right.
This is all boomer magic. Yes, now we got this cool little snazzy baseball diamond to represent colorless magic.
So, Mana Drain is obviously absurdly strong.
Yes, very much so.
It's absurdly strong, right? How does this translate to the difference between a lower powered environment where maybe you don't, and I say, I'm doing that again that I said I wouldn't, but the more thematic cube, right?
Sure.
Where maybe you don't have the super explosive turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 kind of plays where you're actually threatening to win those turns.
Right.
And the hands in the games are much more likely to stretch out to the turn 5, 6, 7, 8, so on and so forth.
So,
how is that going to look?
This is the soul ring for blue in my mind.
It's brutal.
Yeah,
how is it going to feel like when you're sitting there and you're like, man, I just drew this bomb. It's 7 mana and I'm so excited to put this big creature down.
Yeah.
And then it gets mana.
And then they're just going to sink all that mana. And so why did I include this on this list? So there's been a theme here as to why I've chosen these cards. And not all these are going to be EDH, quote unquote, commander is what made these available. It's also been recent reprints or availability or going through binders. So this is kind of a cross pollination of old school Magic curators and players of the cube variety.
Yep.
But also, this is the buyer beware for the new curators. People are coming in, they're interested in building a cube, and they got Boxo cards and they want to put it together.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of reprints lately. And normally I wouldn't have talked about Mana Drain because Mana Drain at one point was what, $150. It was $200.
It was pretty
It was
expensive.
It was getting up there, right?
Yeah, it was pretty expensive.
And it was semi-unachievable, and then they reprinted it once recently, maybe twice. I'm uncertain.
It's been reprinted a couple of times recently, and
So
I will say it's
starting
pretty
to
darn
permeate
expensive.
into Commander,
Yep.
and a lot of Commander players we talked about, they translate into Cube because they hear about what's this cool thing everybody's talking about. I want to play some Cube, and then I've got extra Mana Drains as this card translates over and starts permeating into this environment, and here's why it's not good. It translates to mana acceleration for the person who's done it. It can break environments as far as cutting down. As Stu said, I pay 2, I cut down your 7-drop, your 5-drop, and then it translates to me now having your 5-drop and colorless mana support in my fiat currency now for my little money bags that I'm going to translate over my next turn, leapfrogging ahead of you, basically time walking you on multiples. Does it make sense?
Yeah, because I tend to play blue in a few of my
Right.
decks, and I am very cognizant of the fact that if I have this in my hand, I'm more than happy to play draw go if I can keep up the 2 blue mana for this. I'll wait for you to cast your big 5, 6, 7 mana spell that you're holding or that you're waiting to draw for your finisher, and then I'll just dump my hand and the game's over.
So let's talk about some safer spells. You got your Mana Drain. It's in your binder. You're dying to put this in your brand new thematic cube. We're telling you not to.
No, don't do it.
We're going to offer you problem solution. We're not going to be those people. So counterspell, safe, simplistic.
Don't disagree with counterspell, but I feel it's a little obvious.
Yeah,
right?
it's on the nose. It's on the nose.
It's like the benchmark.
Pay
right?
2 counter targets. Pay blue counter target spell.
It's double pip. Maybe in a if you want to go really like much lower powered, you could talk about something like cancel. Similar kind of deal, but it's 2 blue and a colorless.
Does what you need to do.
Maybe you've already got that in there. Maybe something like a fairy trickery.
I like that card a lot.
Love me some fairy trickery.
Or we could do miscalculation.
Miscalc.
We could do
very, very powerful
syncopate.
Card. Syncopate.
These aren't. Let's take it for a minute. We're not talking powered vintage shoot. We're talking about, as you know, here at UbiCube.
Plenty of
We're
options.
not exclusive to the strictly powered vintage MTGO monolith of cube. We're structuring this in such a way that when new curators enter the forum, they want to have some options laid out for them.
And you've got to be
getting
careful.
These shiny cards reprinted for them. And you want to put them in there. It's so good. I want to put my Soul Ring in there. I just got it. It's sweet. It's been so good in Commander.
You got to be careful with counter magic.
I want to put my manager in. It's amazing. I want to blow up lands because they told me I couldn't in EDH.
You got to be careful with counter magic. Period. In any cube, I feel
you do.
Right?
We talked about
and
this.
I love countering spells.
It stalls out the game. It stops armies from marching, as we spoke about
it
before.
Does.
It's removal.
It is. It is. Although
I qualify it as removal.
We're not going to get into the is a Doomblade and a counter spell or a Doomblade no way.
We won't do that tonight.
But yeah, it's a 1 versus 1, right? If you're going to bear it down to Magic as a game of attrition, it's your 1 card for my 1 card, right? So yeah, it absolutely.
I would say that Mana Drain provides such an advantage that it can be harmful, if not toxic, for lower powered environments. It's another one of those buyer curator beware.
It breaks attrition because we just talked about how powerful Sol Ring was.
Yeah.
But now not only are you breaking it's attrition, it's parity, right? 1 card for 1 card.
Yes.
But if I'm not just getting 1 card for 1 card, I'm getting 1 card and then I can cast 2 huge spells or even 1 huge spell on my next turn and then still have a bunch of mana up to leave for more counter magic.
Agreed.
That can lead to some pretty broken stuff.
So it's gross and blue. We covered that one. Let's move over to the next one. I'll pick up this next one. We'll kind of do a little handoff. The next one is we discussed, and there's a lot of cards to be added to the black section. We're going to talk about black, but I chose to we're gonna highlight 1 card right now, and this one's infamous again in the Commander world. It is banned in EDH, but it's also one of those ones that you have to be exceptionally mindful in your powered vintage environments. Even so, it's strong.
It's very strong.
It's Recurring Nightmare. And for Recurring Nightmare, for 1 swamp, 2 colorless, enchantment. Sacrifice a creature, return Recurring Nightmare to its owner's hand, put target creature card from your graveyard into play this ability as a sorcery. Literally the only thing stopping this from being the most broken Magic card ever sorcery speed is literally making it semi-reasonable.
Yes.
Why is this card bad, Stu?
It's bad because any kind of repeatable effect that allows you to just constantly cycle through, because remember, it's sacrifice a creature.
Yeah.
It's not sacrifice a non-token creature.
Yes.
It's sacrifice anything. You can put any kind of trash out there on the battlefield. You can put a mana dork, you could, whatever the case may be. You get to sack that and put any creature card in.
You can chain with this card.
Yes, you can.
Ridiculously. And that's why we put this one on here. And so this one's not really. So when I was trying to fill these color slots, it ain't no mana drain. It's not prevalent. Hasn't been reprinted. This was actually reprinted. This was printed in Exodus, if I'm not incorrect here. I mean, it hasn't seen a reprinting in forever, and a lot of people probably won't have this in binder. And there's a lot of other cards that could have done, like, I don't know. We talked about Mind Twist and stuff like that, but we wanted to pick a card that was so devastating that if you just had it in your binder, you're playing Commander, and granted it's not in there, and you go, oh man, this card's sick.
I faced this in Vintage Cube,
it's broken.
And it's absolutely kicked my ass.
And it comes down
kicked
to
my ass. And actually, our friend over there in the red t-shirt over on the side
Christian
over there,
hiding in the corner,
hanging out with us, Christian,
like REM hanging out with me in the corner.
I built what I thought was I still stand by it. It was a very, very good deck that I built, and Recurring Nightmare just absolutely wiped the floor with me.
You can just chain some nonsense here. There's so many things, and we can go over that ad nauseum, but what would you offer, Stu, as a reasonable solution? If I had this card and you said, hey, I don't think you should play this, what would you offer me?
So I actually think there's a few options. The one we're going to highlight is Reanimate.
Yeah, seems reasonable.
And you know what? Reanimate is a super, super, super powerful card.
It is very powerful. It almost seems on paper more powerful than Recurring Nightmare.
But
from appearances.
It's one effect.
Once.
You get to do it one time.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Granted, you could recur it. We get all that, flashback, etc. But on the surface, you have to jump through hoops to make this happen multiple times. Recurring Nightmare, the card literally is its own engine.
It is.
Whereas Reanimate, for 1 black, sorcery, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost.
Yeah.
It does give you options to all the graveyards, which is pretty amazing. I do like that very much, versus Recurring Nightmare was from your yard.
Which is your graveyard only, yeah.
But it also costs you life, and I know that we've all talked about life as a resource, but there's only so many Emeralds, etc., that you're going to bring back Promise Ends, right?
Yes.
There's only so much punishment a person can take. Whereas Recurring Nightmare, you can go bananas with this card and do some broken loops. I mean, you could, I don't know, an Aristocrats deck with this, if you want to go low tiered, you can just do some loops and just Aristocrats.
Yeah, especially if you've got any kind of effects on the battlefield that allow you to gain life on top of it.
Oh, man, yeah, this card's disgusting.
Gain life, draw cards, make your opponent sacrifice stuff.
Here at Ubercube, we offer you Reanimate as a viable solution to if you're itching to put a Recurring Nightmare in there, please don't. The other one we're going to offer is like Necromancy. I mean, we can get a lot slower. We can go to the Zombifies, Animate Dead. There's a lot of Corpse Dance. There's options.
There are.
But Recurring Nightmare, the reason why it is banned is because of the machine, the machina.
It's because of the repeatability.
Repeatability is literally the reason.
And I'm going to play devil's advocate just a little bit, and this is definitely something to consider. Regardless of what kind of reanimation package you're looking to put in your cube, you've always got to think about the targets, right? Do you even have the support for the repeatability in your cube, right? Because you can't just continually sacrifice all your creatures if you don't have a way to get a couple of extra creatures out, right? It's one thing if you're going to put, a mana dork and then sack your mana dork. Okay, I'm going to bring back a creature, but how did I get that creature into the graveyard in the first place? Do I have a way to be able to repeat that? It's okay if you're bringing in a creature that's going to create 2 or 3 more creatures.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
that's perfect.
Anything with ETBs is what you would break with this.
You're going to break ETBs. Yeah. You're going to break cards that create tokens and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Rex Sages blow up all their artifacts. I mean, there's a lot you could do with it.
But if you don't have that, then maybe it's not quite so broken. However, then this is some food for thought for when you're looking at the creatures and you're looking at this effect, right? If you have any way for single cards to be able to create that multiple avenues of value, then cards like this, they must be completely off the table.
Yeah.
In a thematic environment.
In a vacuum, Recurring Nightmare doesn't look
and I shouldn't
terrifying.
Say must,
in a vacuum, just reading this card, it doesn't look as bad on paper. Until you see a player just start cycling this like nonsense. Yes. Back to the options we provided was Reanimate, Necromancy, safe options.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to move over to our red section, and I'm going to ask Stu to cover this one.
I'm gonna want you to. I'm gonna ask you to do this one.
Yeah,
because
I'm
gonna
dying.
come up with
I'm dying to do it. So here's what's interesting about red. So we've got this group of people that we hang out with, and we play all the time, and it ranges from, I don't know, 8 to 12 human beings that we reach out, and man, nobody could just give me a strong red card that's so dangerous that you can't put in any environment and wouldn't be harmful.
I think that's a really good sign for
that
red.
Red is healthy.
It's a great sign for red.
But then I thought about one. It was the super monkey. Do you know why I thought about it? Because we got CubeCon coming up soon, right? And everybody kind of said, well, why isn't Ragavan in your artifact cube?
Because you absolutely
and then I started reading,
have this.
And then I started reading Ragavan. Ragavan the Nimble Pilferer. That's a lot to say, by the way. Don't try doing that with Chubby Bunny. You don't want to do that like the Chubby Bunny game when you put marshmallows in your mouth, say Chubby Bunny.
Do you think Elton John?
You should say Ragavan Nimble Pilferer.
Ragavan.
Yeah. So, anyways, for one mountain, you get a legendary creature, Monkey Pirate. I mean, that's badass all by itself. This guy's got loot behind him, got all the booty, hanging out on the pirate ship, feeling everything. Whenever Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, still hard for me to say, like ramming out, deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. And I thought that was fine right there. Pause. I mean, that's okay. That's safe. I could put that in my artifact cube environment. Yeah. What could that hurt? I mean, I don't want, treasures are bad. But then, and exile the top card of that player's library until in a turn you may cast that card. And I went, oh. Wait a minute, that's pretty strong for an artifact cube environment. That's because it's a slower environment, right? And then it has the ability dash for one colorless and one red. You may cast a spell for its dash cost. If you do, it gains haste, and it's returned from the battlefield to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step, making it very hard to kill.
Yeah,
it is a fast monkey that not only gets you treasure, which is breaking the fiat currency, the currency within the Magic game that we talked about,
exactly.
Jumping steps, but not only that, gets mana or card advantage on your opponent.
Yes.
I don't want to put that in my artifact cube. I feel like that would be... I could be wrong. I thought about ordering it. I thought it could be toxic to my environment. What do you think?
I think it would be too much.
I think
I would consider playtesting it, but I think it might be a little bit too much. And I would agree, right? Yeah. And we've talked about this in some of our earlier episodes about treasures have been a super pushed type in Magic recently, right? There's been a whole bunch of cards that have produced treasures. And if this card just literally, if it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure, it would almost be acceptable, I want to say. But the fact that you get that exile the top card of player's library and you get to cast it, and it is a cast, it's not a play, so sure, you don't get a land, but it's still
I also think, my artifact cube, Uberbear's artifact cube, which I'll have in the show notes, would be skewed by the draft experience because not only that, the infamy of this card.
Yeah.
It's gained a lot of accolades for itself in a very short period of time. That dash mechanic
and
alone,
rightly so.
It doesn't have any evasion, granted, but that dash mechanic makes it hit in there really fast.
You don't really need it.
It's overtaken. Yeah. It's powerful, and I think it would break my environment. So
if you drafted this in the vintage cube and you have turn one mountain and then you have a Moxen and you have this in your hand, are you dashing it turn one?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
I am.
Because it's 2 mana.
I get the advantage.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh no, but you're getting a treasure and you're getting a card from them, and who knows what that might be. It might be a Thoughtseize.
Right.
Who knows?
So the point of this one is red.
So much fun.
We had such a hard time within our group naming a card that was broken. So I'm going to put a poll up after this episode's released. And or it's not even a poll. I just want feedback. Like, if you know, as a community, there is a red card that is so broken, but also has.
Does it have to be that broken, or does it just have to be?
It's if you were you're introducing a new Padawan Magic curator, and you're the Jedi in this story, right? And you were telling them what cards you should add and which ones you should never add because they could be toxic or they could actually break your environment. What would red represent for you? Because only one I could come up with in our group was Ragavan the Nimble Pilferer. And there's other things that could do it, but I get it.
I would say we've talked about, we had our Dragons episode.
Yes.
Which was a lot of fun.
Oh, I see.
Everybody loves some dragons. I would say that I do my due diligence, check out cubes on the Cube Cobras and so on and so forth. How about Glorybringer?
No, I don't think so. I think Glorybringer dies to a lot of things. I don't think it could break in an environment.
Does it die to a lot of things? It has 4 toughness.
It exerts.
It exerts and kills something with 4
dies to
toughness.
Doomblade in the lowest powered environments.
Lots of things die to Doomblade.
I get where you're going with this, but I don't feel like that card in itself is warping. It's just
I don't think so either.
It's doing a very organic thing.
But are we talking about warping, or are we talking about cards that you... And again, I'm not saying specifically that a card like Glorybringer, specifically Glorybringer, is so broken individually. But think about it as a whole, right?
Sure.
It's coming in, it's swinging 4 damage, it's removal on a stick.
Yes.
You don't always have to think about the fact that it's Glorybringer, but think about the fact that you have cards that have these multiple effects. We just literally talked about Ragavan. Is it the fact that it creates a treasure token, the fact that makes Ragavan so broken? No, it's the fact that it does so much.
I'm going to give you an overarching theme that I have kept secret. That you
Is it the acceleration?
Yes.
It's the acceleration.
It's acceleration. Sure. Literally, every card that we've covered so far has impacted the currency of the game.
And I do not disagree, right? Because acceleration is ridiculous by itself. But maybe this is just a different avenue of thinking, right? That sometimes the multiple effects, you've always got to be cognizant of any card that has a pretty powerful effect just by itself. Because swinging for 4 damage is strong enough by itself, but swinging for 4 damage
but
and doing 4 damage, do I think that's a broken card? No.
I think it's natural for the cost. And so I did something sneaky. I was sneaky snake. And when I was building this list, the backbone of everything we're going to talk about in the next card is literally going to impact the currency of the game. That's what I use as a central hub here. Soul Ring, Mana Drain, Ragavan, and...
Channel.
Wah, wah, wah. So everybody's caught on to the theme. It's free money. Everybody's getting that dollar bill, y'all, because we're just passing out mana. That's why these cards are dangerous to environments outside of the richest, outside of the most powerful legacy, vintage, etc.
You're 100% right.
And Stu, would you like to break down the channel, please?
So it's pretty straightforward.
Yes.
2 green mana sorcery. Until end of turn, anytime you could activate a mana ability, you may pay 1 life. If you do, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's really, really feels good is playing Channel off your forest and your marks, or even cracking a Black Lotus.
How about use your 2 forests because I wanted to put this in a low-powered environment.
And then paying 15 life and putting Emrakul the Eon's Torn out.
Or we could even make this even interesting. I don't know. The key word here for Channel in that statement was until end of turn. I find that's often overlooked, and people might not believe that because I see
the fact that you can play 2 spells
until you can keep going. You can switch over from main phase 1, main phase 2, etc.
That's right.
You can just do all kinds of nonsense, but it's overlooked in this card because you cast it in main phase 1, and then you put out Mere Battle Sphere. You pay 7 life. Move through your combats, whatever.
Maybe someone tries to miscalculate.
And you forget that you could keep going. You can keep paying it. You can keep digging in. You can pay life to get the miscalculate. You can literally man leak against this.
That's right.
That's the thing that I think's overlooked with this card. It is literally colorless mana as much as you can pay life.
Greatness at any cost.
Greatness at any cost. To some mages, the meaning of life is less important than how much life is left. It's actually kind of sweet.
That is.
It's like very Hallmark card.
That is.
So this card, the reason why we're highlighting this, and again, everybody's got now the backbone central theme that I kept as the secret Anthony layer here,
of course,
is it was currency.
It's all about.
And I know Ragavan was on the cusp, but it was the monies. It was all about the dollar bill. Let's offer a solution because I hate being the person, as I said before, problems only. Nobody likes that person.
That's right.
So what am I going to offer to curators as a solution? Channel's amazing, by the way.
It is.
But don't put it in your artifact cube. Uberbear's artifact cube. It would break it.
It would.
Rampant growths. Kadama reaches.
Yes.
Cultivates.
Yeah.
All these cards, right? They offer mana acceleration, but they're fair.
They are.
Channel is not a fair Magic card. But to make a counter argument, because, kind of like we talked about before with the parity problem with the Ravages of the War and the Armageddons, they do require setup. Channel is not consistent. A lot of people have swayed against the idea of Channel. It's not that it's consistent, it's that it's broken, is what I'm highlighting here. When it works, it's busted. But it requires, as Stu has mentioned, it requires setup. You must have 2 green mana pips, 2 forest, right?
And you have to have
so it's
the
cost
cards
intensive for that idea.
to be able to cast with it, right? Like,
yes, you have to have something to cast where it's just do nothing mana.
It's super broken if you're in the Vintage Cube and you have, as I mentioned previously, if you have Emrakul the Eons, or Blightsteel Colossus, or something along those lines.
Wormcoil Engine.
I'm probably hoping I got one of those two.
If you had 2 of them in your hand, I mean, I wouldn't mind doing a Mirror Battle Sphere and a Blightsteel, or excuse me, and a Wormcoil Engine. I'd kill myself. You can only pay so much life, but you get where I'm going with this.
Would be beautiful.
So you can recover the life.
Yep.
But this card is actually the art's got reprinted recently. It was in another one of those master set or one of those, from the vaults, I guess is what it was. So it became available. It's probably in people's binders. It's gorgeous art. It's been reprinted, I think, in one of the Strixhavens or something like that, making it more available to the audience. Not allowed in Commander. I want to put this in my brand new cube. I think this card's going to be sweet. We're telling you not to. It's kind of like that.
Pretty much.
Unless you're at the highest power level and you're capable of handling it, you should be really aware of it. The options are the Rampant Growths, the Cultivates, the Harrows, etc. They are fair Magic cards. Their mana is on rate. That was the theme. I was wondering if you can catch a secret theme eventually. For what you pay.
And from a player perspective as well, like, Channel is broken, and the reason why I love, and you know what? Yeah, we talked about Kadama's Reach, Cultivate, cards like that.
I think they're fun.
They're fixing.
Yeah,
they're great cards.
They've fallen from favor because of the efficiency, because they cost 3, but at the end of the day, I don't care.
They're great cards.
I'm running a 540. I'm going to rock them.
Absolutely, 100%.
And I got a Lands Matters package in there anyway, so I'm going deep. Yeah, so we got some honorable mentions here, and we're going to give some reasons we want to touch upon these. Stu, would you mind taking on this next one, please?
Skull Clamp.
Yes.
Just going to go straight out through it.
It does it. Let's go for the throat on that one. Skull Clamp. Skull Clamp, what does Skull Clamp say on it?
So Skull Clamp is a 1-mana artifact. It's equip 1. It's an equipment. And equipped creature gets +1/-1.
Boo.
Womp, womp, womp.
Why would you want to do that? It sounds terrible. You're going to kill it.
As far as my understanding is that it was the -1 that was meant to be like the drawback. It's the negative to this card. Like, sure, when the equipped creature dies, you get to draw 2 cards, but we're going to reduce the toughness. Like, surely that's a net negative, right? Not quite. A super broken card.
Yeah,
right?
it's going to let you net cards.
And obviously, if your environment has, or your cube has any way to just consistently push out a bunch of little 1/1 tokens, this just goes from being a very good card to being completely broken.
I want to point out I broke my theme only because I went to the honorable mention section.
Sure.
Up to this point, I've held
it doesn't ramp.
Up to this point, I held a currency.
But you know what's better than ramp?
Drawing cards.
More cards.
Yes. But I wanted to hold back. I was like, hold. So what makes that card kind of dangerous too is it's innocuous. It's common with EDH. People will see it in Commander decks all the time.
Yep.
It's one of those, oh man, I've got beat by this card before in an Aristocrats deck. I'm building a brand new, Anthony's building a Horror Cube. Well, inside of that, I've got a bunch of tokens. Why can't I run Skull Clamp? Well, because it's a huge amount of advantage for a very little cost to your, versus your opponent. Because card draw is very dangerous. Just like currency, ramping.
And I will say that, again, I mentioned about attrition, right?
Yeah.
Attrition is very different, and we'll talk. I don't want to continue to harp on about this, but the EDH brain versus the cube brain, right?
Yeah.
And how attrition works in a 4-player game versus a 2-player environment, right? Being able to draw cards, even if it's 2 cards, when there's 3 other players that are sitting at the table against you, doesn't have remotely the same power level.
These don't have 1-to-1 ratios.
That it does on 1-on-1.
That's what this comes down to.
Exactly.
These cards offer more advantage than what they cost.
Yeah.
And every single card we've talked about, which kind of leads over to our next one, and this is more of a side note for our final note here on cards that you should be aware of as a new curator. And Stu and I were talking about it. It was...
Well, I'm going to name 2. So the first one is Path to Exile, which is a very, very good card.
It's very strong.
But also Swords to Plowshares, which is the greatest removal spell that's ever been printed.
Hyper efficient.
It's efficiency.
And so at the end of the day, that's why we decided to include this. And if you're going to build a brand new cube, this one kind of translates to the currency conversion too. Whereas Skull Clamp was, card advantage, and that's the one that I did as an outlier for funsies.
Yeah.
Path to Exiles, now at the end of the day, are mana advantage.
Yes.
The currency of the game, you get more for your buck. Right? At the end of the day.
And you don't have to, it's not like your
nominal investment.
You don't have to, the investment is minimal, but that translates to, I don't have to hold up a bunch of mana in order to deal with a major problem that might come at me from the other side of the board.
And that's what we talked about in our Bolt the Bird episode is kind of, and if you haven't given that a listen, give it a whirl. But we talk about kind of my structure for curating and building cubes. And Chris Moore and I have talked about it recently. It's also kind of his methodology as well. A simple way to do this is the plus or minus mana value kind of system. Plus or minus 2 is the system that I particularly use when I'm building the framework or skeleton of a cube to decide how I want my removal to match up to my threat level. So if my threats are 5, I go to 3. You see where I'm going with this.
Yes.
It's just kind of a methodology. So let's kind of move into the summary page or the summary of this particular
Well, let's start it off quite simple. Soul Ring.
Yeah, Soul Ring.
Probably keep it out of your cube unless you're putting together like a vintage cube or a legacy cube or, I don't know. Judge it for yourselves, but you've got to be very, very careful.
Yeah, you got to be very mindful of
it.
it.
And the fact that EDH has made it so synonymous with Magic almost, and yes, the discussion on social media certainly shows that a lot of people are really aware of the power level. Like I said, plenty of people have turned zeroed it and just banned it from their play groups. But if you're in a group and you're just so used to playing Sol Ring in all of your commander decks or whatever the case may be, don't just think that because it's an auto-include in your EDH decks that it can be an auto in your cubes.
Yeah, so it's the central theme that we've had here is any card that offers either repeatable mana acceleration or just a massive amount of mana acceleration.
Yeah, and that is both.
And or a strong amount of repeatable card advantage. It's something that you should be very mindful as a curator because it can be very warping. And it might not, reveal itself in game 1 or game 2, but over time, the right players are going to start working it, and that Skull Clamp is going to break that token deck, and you will not get a chance to play on the other side of the table.
Yeah, repeatable, super strong effects.
You have to be mindful.
Or explosive.
Nobody wants a flat environment, but at the end of the day, you also don't want a broken environment.
Yeah, like Channel is not a repeatable effect, but the explosiveness of it is just
that's a good word.
Absolutely,
That's an accurate statement because all these are explosive in different little. Whether Soul Ring's a microburst, but repeatable. Recurring Nightmare, it is a repeatable effect. You continue to get advantage.
Supernova is like a stick of dynamite, and Channel is like a supernova.
And so, kind of the core element here too, and I know all these cards are not Commander EDH legal, obviously not.
Channel is not.
But they do kind of set the mindset. So we really are encouraging cube curators and players. We're encouraging them to put on that cube cap, that curation cap, and not that EDH brain that we talked about in the old Gnawbones method.
Exactly.
Right? And then what was really neat about this exercise, and this is what we're going to put out to the universe here, is, in my opinion, red was the most healthy environment as far as cards that you could take from the highest power cubes and maybe get away with putting them in lower tiers and not break an environment. And I would say that white was the second at that. It could handle it after
Which is fascinating.
And green would be the third. I could ticker tape into green here, but once I got into black and blue,
not a whole lot of surprises that black.
Once
and blue
I got black and blue, it meant there were so many busted, abusable cards.
Even you could even go as far to I don't think this is particularly going to be a surprise. Like Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Tutor, cards like that. Like those are absolutely black staple cards. Demonic Tutor is a $30 card. I'm not quite sure how much Vampiric Tutor is. It's a lot. Yeah, they're not cheap cards, but you're going to include those if you have the budget for it, right? If you're trying to build powerful decks,
we weren't going to talk about tutors, but you do bring up a good point. I actually took the tutors out of almost all of my cubes except for my powered vintage cube. Yeah. It was just offering too much advantage. It was skewing gameplay a little bit. Like literally every one of my cubes at one point had them.
I'm picking them very, very highly. And I didn't include tutors in this, but tutors can be game warping too. And that's also something that translates easily from, again, we're going back and forth between Commander, but that's where the Commander player becomes the cube curator. Correct.
And walks over and they have all these this suite of tools and they want to use them, but we're just telling people to be very mindful of it and not to overly, saturate.
Yeah, because it might be the quickest way that one individual player gets to have his fun over and over again every game by drawing the most broken or powerful spell that's in your cube.
Yeah.
But that just means every game is going to be that player doing that. And then that player that played against player number 2, they're both going to realize how strong it is. And then next time they draft that cube, they're going to go for those tutors because they know that they can just get the strongest card.
In summary, if you're going to run that Soul Ring, run that Mind Stone instead. If you're going to run that Mana Drain,
run Fairy Trickery.
Sure, Counterspell instead. If you're going to run the Recurring Nightmare,
run
run necromancy or anything zombify, anything else. Just don't run that one. If you're gonna run channel, you're a mean person. Run rampant growth, cultivate, run all those. Yep. And as far as the monkey goes, you know, whatever. I don't know. Run anything you want. Red seems pretty safe.
I think that's
just go nuts. Just go nuts. Red is okay. Even the monkey's not backbreaking. The monkey dies to bolt.
Well, look.
I mean, it dies to everything.
We actually talked about this very briefly in our pre-recording, little chat. Is that the discussion I've seen again? We'll talk about EDH because I think it's important. What is the one red card that seems to come up quite a lot when people talk about what could potentially be banned from Commander, and it's Dockside Extortionist. What is the difference between Dockside Extortionist and Ragavan in a 1-versus-1 environment? I mean, it's completely
it requires presence and density.
It requires an incredible setup.
It requires it's powerful in the commander environment because you got 3 other opponents that are building up this entire landscape in front of you. Whereas in a 1v1 environment, it's not very powerful. Now, the one environment, if you're going to run that, and I will not put it in there, is my artifact cube because it does have the density in order to make that highly explosive.
What about the two-handed giant cube question?
No, I won't put it in there, man. That card. First off, I only own one. It's in the Heb, back to my flaming Elmo. That's good enough for me.
That's good enough for
me. All right, we're going to move over to the social. Stu, would you mind taking us away, please?
All right, so first of all, again, we want to thank all the listeners, everyone who's checked out this podcast episode and all the previous ones or any of the previous ones. Much love to all of you guys and all the support and all the communication that we've had on the social medias, on the Twitterverse. We've posted a bunch of cool questions and asked the opinion of the community about cards and archetypes and all that kind of stuff. Had a bunch of great feedback. So again, thank you to everyone that takes the time to just reach out and either say hi, tell us they appreciate something that they've listened to, or give us their opinion on something. We really do appreciate the responsiveness, or we really appreciate the communication from the community. Great stuff. I've said this before. If you do love this podcast, and we hope that you do, please feel free. Give us a 5-star review on whatever your chosen podcast platform is. Really goes a long way to get us some more exposure, and we want to, get the content out to all the cube enthusiasts out there. If you want to reach out to us or check us out on Twitter, you can find us at UberCubeMTGPod. If you want to drop us an email just to share some stuff with us or ask us for an opinion either on a cube or any one of our episodes, you can reach us at ubercubemtgpodcast@gmail.com. And also check us out on Discord. We've got a link on our Twitter, and we'd love for you to stop by and hang out and chat with us. Anthony, tell us about the Patreon.
We have a wonderful suite of options that we can provide our listeners. That if you have the chance, just check out our Patreon. We've got good stuff on there as far as like what we're trying to encourage, what Stu and I are working on. This is a full community thing. And what we have within said Patreon is the ability for the listeners to add to the content of the show.
That's right.
To have direct interaction. Within our Discord, we have a Patreon section, etc. All the things. But what we really want some sound bites from our listeners that are on the Patreons. We want the card of the week type of thing. We want the what I thought about Ragavan is the most powerful red card ever. Should never, but etc. Right? You get where I'm going with this. This is what we want. We want total feedback. We want full transparency with our audience. And in order to keep the lights on and continue to pay the bills here at Casa de Uber, this is the way. Other than that, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube and say, Happy Cubing!